Relations between President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have sunk to a wartime low, with the United States allowing passage of a Gaza ceasefire resolution at the United Nations on Monday and drawing a sharp rebuke from the Israeli leader. Netanyahu abruptly cancelled a visit to Washington by a senior delegation to discuss Israel's threatened offensive in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. This came soon after the U.S. abstained from a Security Council vote that demanded an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Hamas and the release of all hostages being held in Gaza. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accused the U.S. of retreating from a principled position by allowing the vote to pass without conditioning the ceasefire on the release of hostages. This is the strongest public clash between the two close allies since the war began. White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby said the Biden administration was kind of perplexed by Netanyahu's decision to call off the visit by that delegation to Washington, and added that the Israelis were choosing to create a perception of daylight when they don't need to do that. Kirby and the American ambassador to the UN said the US abstained from the vote because the resolution did not condemn Hamas. Significantly, US officials chose to abstain rather than veto the proposal because, and I quote, "It does fairly reflect our view that a ceasefire and the release of hostages come together." That's what John Kirby said. Now, the 15-member UN Security Council voted 14-0 to approve this resolution. The chamber broke into loud applause after the vote. Remember, in the past, the United States vetoed all Security Council ceasefire resolutions in large part because of the failure to tie them directly to the release of hostages, the failure to condemn Hamas's terror attacks on Israel, and the delicacy of the ongoing ceasefire negotiations. American officials have argued that the ceasefire and release of hostages are linked, while Russia, China, and many other Security Council members favored unconditional calls for a ceasefire in Gaza. The Monday resolution demands the release of hostages but does not make it a condition for the ceasefire for the month of Ramzan, which ends in April. The U.S. decision to abstain from this particular vote at the UN Security Council comes at a time of growing tensions between President Biden's administration and Netanyahu over Israel's prosecution of the war, the high number of civilian casualties, and the limited amounts of humanitarian assistance reaching Gaza. The two countries have also publicly clashed over Netanyahu's rejection of a Palestinian state, Jewish settler violence against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank, and the expansion of settlements there. Additionally, the well-known antagonism between Netanyahu and Biden, which dates from Biden's tenure as vice president, deepened after Biden questioned Israel's strategy in combating Hamas. Recently, the then Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, a big Biden ally, suggested that Netanyahu was not operating in Israel's best interests and called for Israel to hold fresh elections. Biden signaled his approval of Schumer's remarks, prompting a rebuke from Netanyahu, who called the remarks wholly inappropriate. In fact, Biden himself stated recently that Netanyahu was hurting Israel more than he was helping the country. Last week, Netanyahu rebuffed a U.S. request to halt the planned Rafah invasion, vowing to act alone if necessary. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned that Israel could soon face growing international isolation. Vice President Kamala Harris, for her part, said Israel could soon face unspecified consequences if it launched a ground assault in Rafah. All right, let's now get you some political news from the United States, which is gearing up for the presidential election, and well, there seems to be more legal trouble for Donald Trump. In yet another legal setback to Donald Trump, a New York court has set 15th April as the date when, barring some unforeseen event, Trump will become the first former U.S. president and commander-in-chief to go on trial in a criminal case. Trump will face trial in the hush money case involving adult film actor Stormy Daniels. This trial is expected to add a whole new dimension to the November presidential election. It could be an acid test of Trump's strategy of seeking to discredit what he insists is a corrupt legal system and to leverage his political movement against his opponents. Despite all of Trump's efforts to defer the trials in all the cases against him till after the elections, there is now a real possibility that one of the candidates on the presidential ballot could in fact be a convicted felon. Of course, there is also the possibility that Trump could be acquitted in this particular criminal case. Remember, he is facing 34 charges of falsifying business records related to hush money payments made before the 2016 presidential election to cover up an alleged affair with adult film star Stormy Daniels. Trump has pleaded not guilty and denied the affair. Trump has been more successful in putting off some of the other criminal threats he faces. He has, for instance, made a sweeping claim of presidential immunity before the US Supreme Court that has frozen Special Counsel Jack Smith's federal election interference trial with a ruling that is not expected from the High Court until the end of June. The former president and his co-defendants also launched an unsuccessful bid to disqualify Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis from the Georgia election interference prosecution. The federal trial, initiated by Trump's hoarding of classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida, is bogged down in interminable litigation with a judge whom he appointed, Eileen Cannon, apparently in no hurry to get a trial on the docket. So there is a good chance that the Manhattan hush money case, seen as the least damaging to Trump because it may not result in jail time even if he's convicted, could be the only criminal case to reach a verdict before the November election. The former president expertly used his 4 criminal indictments, a mugshot in an Atlanta jail, and his darkening legal prospects to actually relaunch his presidential campaign earlier this year. He was able to squeeze the oxygen from all his GOP rivals and stage a dominant march towards the party nomination. The question now is whether Trump will succeed in pulling off a similar trick with a broader electorate come the 5th of November.
It's all about election interference. This is all Biden-run things, meaning Biden and his thugs, because I don't know if he knows he's alive. And it's a shame. It's a shame what's happening to our country. This is election interference. They are doing things that have never been done in this country before. So we're going through this weaponization of our government to try and knock out somebody's political opponent. And so far, based on the polls, it's not working at all. The people understand it. We have a man who just ruled he'd like the trial to start in 21 days or something. And I don't know how you can have a trial that's going on right in the middle of an election. Not fair. Not fair. It's not fair at all. He knows that, too. He's a Democrat judge. He wants to do that because they're all trying to damage Trump as much as possible. It's having the reverse effect, but maybe someday it won't. I don't know. They wouldn't be quibbling at all. They never started it. And you know why they didn't start it? Because they didn't know I'd be running, and they didn't know how well I'd do. And if I were not running, or if I were doing poorly like everyone else has done, because they're all gone, they're all knocked out except for crooked Joe Biden. If I were doing poorly, this wouldn't be happening. None of these trials would have been happening. If I wasn't running, they wouldn't be happening.
And as we wrap up this edition of Global Lens, the last story on the show is also from the United States. Let's get you all the details. There has been a dramatic bridge collapse in the US city of Baltimore in the state of Maryland after a container ship crashed into the bridge, sending the steel structure tumbling into the river water underneath. Rescue workers in Baltimore are searching for a large number of missing people after a major bridge in the city's port was struck by a container ship early on Tuesday. According to the fire department, 2 people have been rescued from the water so far. The footage that has emerged shows the collapse of the 1.6-mile-long 4-lane bridge after it was hit by the vessel. Officials say conditions are unsafe for rescuers due to objects hanging from the structure, freezing conditions and limited visibility. The bridge that has collapsed extends over the Patapsco River and serves as the outermost crossing of the Baltimore harbor. It is an essential link of Interstate 695 of the Baltimore Beltway. Seconds after the collision, the bridge snapped and plunged into the water along with vehicles and people. The ship is now wedged into debris from the Francis Scott Key Bridge, which, as we said, is 3 kilometers long and part of a major highway. Sonar has detected multiple vehicles underwater where the temperature is around 8 degrees Celsius. The worry is that hypothermia can occur when a person's body temperature drops below 35 degrees Celsius. There is no indication that the crash was intentional, but officials say it is too early to determine what caused it. Reports say the crew of the container ship are all Indian nationals, and all of them, including the two pilots on board, are all accounted for, and there are no reports of any injuries to any of them. The port of Baltimore, near the bridge, is the largest in the US for specialized cargo.
At approximately 1:30 a.m., a cargo ship leaving the port of Baltimore struck the Francis Scott Key Bridge. This caused a catastrophic collapse of the bridge. First responders from the Maryland Transportation Authority, the Toll Authority, and our federal, state, and local partners immediately responded to the scene. At this time, this is an active search and rescue mission. We know there were individuals on the bridge at the time of the collapse working on the bridge, contractors for us.
Well, search operations are underway to locate those who may be under the water.